Tonight on CFTK-TV News, Prince Rupert's emergency department issues resulted in a serious medical incident. David Eby and Pierre Poilievre are publicly feuding, and Taylor Backrack has publicized his thoughts on a few subjects.
Northwest BC's only television news team. We are CFTK-TV News.
Good evening, I'm Cale Maslin, and here's what's making the news in the Northwest and beyond. The struggles of emergency departments in cities such as Prince Rupert have begun resulting in certain medical situations being made even worse than they would be, and a warning: some of the images and details in this story may be disturbing to some. In light of word coming out about the Prince Rupert Regional Hospital's current situation that has seen physicians leave and their emergency department be closed down several times, a story has emerged about what would be a nightmare medical scenario for anyone. Prince Rupert resident Tish Lozier recently spoke to CFTK in an interview about a very scary situation involving her husband.
So Joe started having seizures in bed at 6 o'clock in the morning. Our first round up to the ER was terrible. The ambulance showed up, told us they would have to take him to Terrace because our emergency room was closed. Took us a little while to get Joe into the ambulance. By that time, it was probably close to 7 o'clock, and they said, the ER here in town is going to be open at 8. Do you want to stay here and wait for the ER, or do you want to go to Terrace?
The couple decided to remain in Prince Rupert to try and get him seen as fast as possible, but Tish's husband Joe was released after what she called the bare minimum of work being done, like x-rays and some pain relief. But that was not the end of their medical situation for that day.
We went home. He had another seizure moving from the car to the house and did a header into a cement block. He got a big laceration on his head. It was pretty severe, right down to his skull, bleeding everywhere. Called 911 again, and they told us that there were no ambulances available. I asked for other kinds of assistance to get him into the car, RCMP, fire rescue, something. And they said they didn't know the service agreements in town, and they weren't sending help.
Eventually, Tish needed to get help from a couple of neighbors to get Joe to the hospital again, and while he was treated right away for his gash and seizures, he was not admitted again due to a reported lack of beds and staff. They also made a third trip to the hospital later that same day with Joe vomiting and showing some other concussion-like symptoms, but for a third time he was not admitted to stay for a while. While Joe is seemingly doing okay right now, Tish is encouraging others who experience this kind of situation to get their stories out publicly so that something can be done about it. North Coast MLA Jennifer Rice was able to give a recorded comment about this particular incident.
I think that was just tragic what happened, what unfolded for them. And, I spoke with Tish, and her husband, Joe, was recovering, so I didn't speak with Joe. But not only was Joe physically injured subsequent to his seizures, but also just the emotional toll on people, on both him and his wife. I think it's just really unfortunate. My heart broke for them.
Prince Rupert Mayor Herb Pond also released a similar statement expressing his concern over the ER closures as well as empathy for those affected by it, while assuring residents that work is being done to fix it. For CFTK-TV News, I'm Cale Maslin. The man responsible for most of the decision-making in British Columbia and another man hoping to become Prime Minister are in the midst of a notable disagreement. British Columbia's Premier and the leader of the Federal Conservative Party have recently gotten into a very public war of words due to a letter. Premier David Eby was in Terrace at the end of last week to announce some funding headed the way of the Northwest BC Resource Benefits Alliance, and not long after, he was asked about Pierre Poilievre writing a letter directed at him.
It was an unusual letter from the leader of the opposition. He suggested that we allow the federal government to administer our carbon tax program here in BC. If we did that with the increase on April 1st that all Canadians are seeing, it would mean less money for British Columbians. We're returning more than the amount of the increase through our program. If we don't do our program, the federal government does theirs, it means less money for British Columbians. So he obviously doesn't understand our program, or if he does understand it, he's just being disingenuous with the request.
Poilievre has since fired back at Eby by saying that under both Eby and Justin Trudeau, many BC residents are being forced to eat bologna since that is all that they can afford. The main goal of the initial letter seemed to be to try and get Eby to join Poilievre and 7 other Canadian premiers from Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, as well as Nova Scotia, in their mission to halt carbon tax increases. But Eby has not budged on his stance regarding the carbon tax, which in the case of BC is still in the provincial government's control, although they have agreed to increase it when scheduled by the federal government. For CFTK-TV News, I'm Cale Maslin.
But Eby and Poilievre were not the only ones making public statements, as another MP had his own thoughts on a few different public items.
When he also joined several other politicians at the recent terrace announcement of funds that would be sent to the Northwest BC Resource Benefits Alliance, Skeena Bulkley Valley MP Taylor Bachrach went on to discuss in an interview subjects such as what he hopes to see improved specifically in the Bulkley Valley area.
One of the big priorities in the Bulkley Valley is around wastewater treatment, and for a number of years the town of Smithers has struggled with its wastewater effluent, and the sewage lagoons that it's used for a long time haven't been up to the job of treating all of the wastewater the community produces. So I've been working with Mayor Attrell, bringing her voice to Ottawa and helping the federal government understand the urgency of that priority.
But local northern subjects like the airfare in Smithers were not the only thing he was asked about, as Bachrach spoke on the joint subjects of federal pharmacare as well as dental care.
This is a big deal, especially for seniors in the Northwest. The dental care program, the federal dental care program, is rolling out right now, and I'm working to get as many seniors enrolled in the program as possible. So any seniors out there who don't have dental insurance, I really encourage them to contact my office, make sure they're getting enrolled in the federal program. The other big news for folks in the Northwest is pharmacare, and there's a bill that's been tabled in the House of Commons that is going to create a framework for universal pharmacare moving forward. And the first priority in that bill is covering diabetes medication and devices.
Bachrach later stated that he has spoken with many Northwesterners that have had issues affording the cost of such medical equipment and believes that these programs will end up being a game changer, while hoping to get as many people who need these programs on board them as soon as possible. For CFTK-TV News, I'm Cale Maslin.
Coming up next, a BC broadcasting legend has sadly passed away. Welcome back. Tributes are pouring in for a legendary BC broadcaster as George Garrett died at the age of 89 following a battle with cancer. He was a longtime radio reporter at CKNW and broke countless stories and exposed scams, but he's also being remembered for his boundless generosity. Here's CTV's Martin McMahon.
George Garrett was a hell of a reporter.
During a 40-plus year career at CKNW, George Garrett broke exclusive after exclusive. Those who worked with him remember Garrett for more than just the scoops, but how he treated people.
Oftentimes, reporters are portrayed as hard-charging and negative and unhappy and cynical. George Garrett was none of that. He was a really nice guy. He was a good man, and he was trustworthy. He was honest. You know, if he made a promise to a source, he would stick to his promises.
His contact book was legendary, and he was trusted by newsmakers. So when a story broke, they would answer his call or respond to George because he knew that he would treat them fairly, even if it was a negative story.
Garrett is remembered for some stories in particular, from the BC penitentiary riots in the 1970s to his coverage of the 1992 riots in LA after the police beating of black man Rodney King. Garrett went missing for a time during the riots.
I was his news director in the 1992 Los Angeles riots, and that was a very frightening situation. So I had to call his wife and tell him, "We've lost your husband in the middle of a riot zone."
It turned out Garrett had been beaten, but ended up making his way back to the hotel to file his stories. But Like any good reporter, there were times when he left those back at the station sweating.
He called me up one night. I was about 2 minutes to 10 in the major news to 10. And he called up and said, I've got a story that's going to fit a 90. And I said, George, you got a minute and 15 seconds, so it's going to have to. And, you know, it was just those kinds of things, you know, the little things. And he laughed and I laughed, and because you know of the pressures in a newsroom and having to get on the air and having to get stuff done.
After retiring, he co-founded the Volunteer Cancer Drivers Society, helping patients get to their treatments. The Garrett family told us they're grateful to have had as many years with George as they did. Us too. Martin McMahon, CTV News, Vancouver.
2 mainland police departments have been tasked with investigating a complaint made against the Victoria Police Department. The complaint targets perceived failures with Vic PD's policies and leadership. The decision was announced at a police board meeting recently, and Anna McMillan was there.
The Victoria and Esquimalt Police Board has announced Delta and Surrey Police will investigate a complaint made against Vic PD.
Policing in Victoria is facing a crisis of integrity.
That former board member filed the Police Act complaint and spoke to the board last night before it announced the third-party investigators.
The governance committee met and discussed this complaint, which we take very seriously. I can't emphasize that enough.
Paul Schachter's complaint targets perceived failures in Vic PD's policies, management, and training. Schachter filed it in response to a corruption controversy where a major drug prosecution fell apart after Vic PD allowed an officer who was being investigated by the RCMP to work on the case, and a judge found other officers tried to conceal his involvement with the investigation.
My recommendation to the police board is that they hire a neutral lead investigator to lead the whole situation. There is precedent to hire retired judges and justices to do this.
In a statement, board member Paul Farrow says they felt an external review was necessary to ensure transparency and public trust. Board co-chair Barb Desjardins says we have confidence in the policies, training, and leadership within our department, which we pay very close attention to, but we have a responsibility to listen and respond to concerns from our communities.
I'm perfectly fine with Surrey or Delta providing information, but somebody on the top has to be able to assess that and has to be impartial and has to be removed from the police culture.
There are 6 points of concern in his complaint related to the drug prosecution that crumbled. 2 will be reviewed by Surrey Police, and the other 4 will be reviewed by Delta Police, as they're related to a Police Act investigation Delta is leading. Victoria's police chief says integrity and accountability are key values at Vic PD. We support the governance committee's decision to request an external review as part of the processes that ensure transparency and accountability for police services in BC.
We want to get this resolved as soon as possible, but this is a complex investigation as I understand it. So I would anticipate that we would not be hearing back from them, and probably until probably the early fall.
The board's co-chair has previously said once the investigation wraps, the findings will be made public. Anna McMillan, CTV News, Victoria.
Turning to tonight's weather, the North Coast should only see clear skies with a low at 2 degrees. The Terrace-Kitimat area is said to deal with a few clouds at a low at 0, and the Bulkley Valley and Lakes District is expected to be partly cloudy with their low at -11. On the North Coast, their week is said to be dealing with sun for a bit before turning to clouds and rain, while the high bounces from 12 to 8 degrees. In the Terrace-Kitimat area, the week for them should also follow a similar route of sun to begin the week, then rain and clouds, while the high moves between 6 and 10 degrees. And in the Bulkley Valley and Lakes District, their next week or so also has sun at the start, then some flurries and a mix of sun and cloud after, with the high shifting from 4 to 10 degrees. Checking out the highways now, visit Drive BC for the latest and up-to-date conditions. And as always, drive safe out there. On Highway 16, there is slippery sections, utility work, bridge maintenance, mowing, a vehicle incident, plus the Usk ferry is out of service and the cable car is in effect. Highway 37 has some slippery sections too, while also having compact snow, water pooling, and frost heaves. 37A has roadside brushing, some more slippery sections on the Nishka Highway, and the Telegraph Creek Road has slippery sections of its own. And this is what the roads were looking like this afternoon around the region from the view of the province's highway cams. Still to come, residents recently had their first chance to pay respect to a former prime minister. Welcome back. Because it's a leap year, spring has officially begun, and the season isn't the only thing starting earlier. The unusually warm winter and a stretch of sunny weather has skyrocketed tree pollen counts. CTV's Shannon Patterson on the March misery for allergy sufferers.
4 consecutive days of spectacular sunshine has coaxed these colorful blooms from the ground in mid-March. But there's a downside to the record-breaking heat.
Honestly, I've sneezed like 50 times today.
Now that the weather has gotten much better, we're seeing much higher pollen counts. And this is, of course, impacting people with pollen allergies.
Our mild winter meant this year's tree pollen season started in January. That's 2 to 4 weeks earlier than normal. And this latest stretch of unseasonably warm weather has sent it into overdrive.
So the pollen is floating in the air. We're getting it into our nose, into our eyes, and into our lungs. So we get symptoms of nasal stuffiness, congestion, drippy nose, sneezing, itchy, tearing eyes.
I already have a very stuffy nose, itchy, sore throat. I find allergies just keep coming earlier and earlier every year. So unfortunately this year it's already happening.
Because it's happening at the tail end of cold and flu season, it can be hard to know what's causing that runny nose and sneezing.
We can distinguish it from a cold mainly due to the duration of these symptoms, because pollen season goes for many months. A cold usually subsides within a few days to a week.
For people who suffer with allergies, the hits will just keep on coming. Metro Vancouver has a second pollen season for grass, which runs from May to August.
Some can be allergic to both, some are just one or the other, but they present in the same way.
People with mild symptoms can find relief with over-the-counter antihistamines and saline nasal rinses.
For those who have more moderate to severe symptoms, we recommend the prescription nasal sprays or antihistamine eye drops.
Essentially, for the time being, I just have to take my medication, my nasal spray, my eye drops, and just hope for the best.
Because even allergy sufferers can't resist going outside when the first day of spring looks like this. Shannon Patterson, CTV News, North Vancouver.
To Ottawa, where the public had their first opportunity to pay respect to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. CTV's Judy Trin has more.
For a decade, Brian Mulroney took the same route on Wellington Street to work. On this last drive, his family is with him again, watching as his casket is placed on the shoulders of Mounties.
Prepare to shoulder.
One who was 4 years old when Mulroney became Canada's 18th Prime Minister.
He's certainly a leader that I think we can all look up to.
Mulroney's casket is guarded by a vigil of sentinels. At his lying in state, the first visitors were dignitaries and successors. Mulroney's presence a reminder of what it takes to follow in his steps.
He established trust with leaders around the world, and in doing so exemplified the soft power of Canada, the fundamental values of empathy, of trust.
It's Mulroney's mark on the world stage that resonates for many here, including Canada's first Black Governor General.
He practiced diplomacy, the way he stood up to the cause, against apartheid in South Africa, the way he stood up, for the release and pleaded for the release of Nelson Mandela.
South Africa's High Commissioner, Riaz Sheikh, stopped to show Mila Mulrooney a treasured photo of the moment her husband was awarded the African country's highest honor for breaking with the United States and Britain and helping to dismantle a racist regime.
It took enormous courage, and that fractured the politics of the world and allowed what we would call in Zulu vulindlela. It opened the way that led for change in South Africa.
But the boy from Bay Como is also being remembered for smaller moments, for winning back-to-back majority governments based on inclusive politics.
He treated every caucus member as, in a sense, an equal because we had all been elected. He made a point of befriending people who he thought were either shy or against him.
For those who can't make it to Ottawa to pay their respects in person, the Department of Canadian Heritage has set up an online book of condolences. Judy Trin, CTV News, Ottawa.
And now we turn our attention to the stock markets. The Canadian dollar is up 19/10 of a cent. The price of gold is up $23.70. Oil is down 20 cents. Natural gas is down 1 cent. Aluminum is up $4. In Toronto, the TSX is up 41.55 points. Venture Index is up 3.29. In New York, the Dow Jones is up 269.24, and NASDAQ is up 32.43. Still ahead is a look at the Canucks as the playoffs draw nearer. Welcome back. With playoffs close by, it's getting serious for the Vancouver Canucks, who got a needed win recently after 2 losses. In the win, Elias Pettersson found his game, and Quinn Hughes showed his physical side, potentially getting closer to history. Here's the latest Ringside Report.
Miller shoots, kicked out, Pettersson scores! Back on the board.
Good structure, and yeah, it's a good team effort.
Petey preferring to let his play do most of the talking, snapping his mini slump en route to a dominant 3-point night, earning first star honors.
Really good. Petey was really engaged. He had a really good game.
Captain Quinn Hughes also making an impact beyond the score sheet.
What's the message around the league? Don't go up there with Quinn Hughes. That was a hell of a hit.
Yeah, it was funny. You don't see that much from me, but yeah, it was a good feeling.
With just over 10 games left in the season, Hughes is considered a front-runner to take home the Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman.
I think it would be massive. More than 50 years of existence for this organization, they've never had a defenseman anywhere close to this.
It'd be a franchise first, and he joins some elite company, becoming just the 9th player under 25 years old to capture the hardware.
Here's Quinn Hughes as a 24-year-old, still finding his way, but getting better year by year and even night by night. And so I think it would be pretty significant.
With the playoffs around the corner, the Canucks are atop the Western Conference standings, but other teams are on their tail, including the red-hot Oilers and streaking Avalanche, meaning this time of year, there's no days off.
So to me, there's still so much going on around them that in some ways, that just allows the Canucks to focus on themselves.
And they're already taking some bumps to get there. JT Miller had a scare and missed a few shifts before returning, and goaltender Thatcher Demko remains sidelined for likely a few more weeks as the March homestand continues Thursday against Montreal. Kevin Chirac, CTV News, Vancouver.
Authorities with Correctional Services Canada say drugs and other items worth nearly $300,000 were seized at a Fraser Valley prison. Another statement said methamphetamine, other drugs, and 2 smartphones were among items seized from the medium security unit at Mission Institution. The service says it's boosting measures to stop contraband from entering prisons, and police are investigating further. That's all of our news for now. From everyone at CFTK-TV News, I'm Cale Maslin. Thanks for watching.